Skeleton Crew episode 4 might be the most interesting we've had, I think, of the season so far. Like it gives you a whole lot, and then at the same time it's like, well, was there a lot there? And then you're like, no, there was definitely a lot there. Very unique Star Wars episode. So today on the Force with Friends podcast, we're talking Skeleton Crew episode 4. Traditional format as we usually do these episodic things. We're going to start off with our initial thoughts. We're going to get into our grade for the episode. We'll start off with the dystopian nature of this show, like this specific episode, not the show as a whole. Kind of the Divergent Hunger Games type deal. We'll talk about the character. Yeah, very different. We'll talk about the character development. Neel, Fern, a lot going on there. And then also, obviously, we're going to talk about at Attin, at Achrann, these jewels of the Old Republic. That's the mystery that keeps growing here. Like this is kind of turning into a mystery show to me. Like what the heck is going on? So, Kevin, initial thoughts on episode 4. Can't say I know much about Noad Attin or something like that. whatever.
Yeah,
SM33
can't say I remember Noad Attin. Yeah. Initial thoughts.
Yeah.
I was a little bit confused about how I felt about this episode. And I got to preface this with a lot of it is purely personal aesthetic, right? Like there's nothing wrong with the writing or this episode. It was a really good episode. Some really good stuff in this episode. But something about just the swap to like the dystopian apocalyptic, it did kind of feel like you mentioned those young adult novels, like just being dropped into something like that. Which to me was like just a big shift from what the show had been the first 3 episodes. And so again, I think that's personal taste. It didn't grab my attention the way the rest of the show has been. But it definitely made up for it with some really good focus on some of our characters. So to me, the backdrop, where this was taking place, it was a little bit muddled. It left me, I guess, wanting to know more that I don't think we're going to get. I guess we'll talk about that when we talk about at Achrann, but yeah. So high point for characters. I mean, some of the best moments for the characters so far, but the planet itself and the whole war situation didn't click with me as much. So
yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as you. On our live breakdown with Padawan Chronicles and I that we were on, I wasn't sure how I felt right after the episode. I've thought about it more, kind of like what you said. I'm still not crazy about the whole little battle thing in the middle. To me, that was just like more to the episode than it needed to be, but I get it. That's where a lot of development happened. I did say it's not my least favorite episode. It's my second least favorite, which is like a weird thing to say out of 4. Like it ranks 3 out of 4 for me. I think last week in episode 1 were just so good. And I think this one was good too, just as far as, grading it where it's at. If I'm just looking strictly at like Neel in this episode, it's like a 10 out of 10, right? Like, he does so good. He steals the show. But then when it's into like the other stuff, I just didn't care for that as much. So my grade for this week's episode was a 7.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Maybe it was 7 or 7.5. Maybe it was 7.5. Either way, it was in that range.
I've readjusted mine because the more I've thought about it, the more I like certain parts of it. It really is like 2 very different sides of a coin for me. Because there's some really great moments, not just for Neel, but for Fern as well. Like we get some really interesting development with her, and then of course still really invested in the adventure of the kids, like this mission that they're on. We get a lot of good stuff with that. But there were just some things that didn't click with me with the backdrop to all this.
Well, even we know the daughter.
So I think I ended up at like a 7.
Yeah, I'm going to give it 7.5. I think that's fair. The daughter of the leader of that clan in the episode, I can't think of her name, but we even see like she gets a full character arc in 20-something 30 minutes of TV, which I thought was pretty cool too. Like sometimes we don't get a character arc at all, and this one side character got one. So that was
it was interesting.
So let's just dive in on this part. So let's dive in to the whole dystopian nature on at Achrann. Now, some of this will tie into our at Achrann discussion. That's our last topic. But I thought I knew as soon as the episode started, it was not going to be Attin that they were on. Like he was like,
Right.
oh, that's too quick and
Yeah.
too easy. But
Right.
they get to these coordinates, and you can tell like something's off. It's like a wasteland, right? It was pretty interesting how like it mirrored Attin, but it was very much like just a destroyed, scorched earth planet. And then, of course, they come across in any good dystopian novel a group of people just barely making it through, right? And so
Yeah.
it was really taking a page from all of those early 2010s dystopian novel shows that were all coming out like at the exact same time.
Yeah.
That was pretty on point for that. Now, and that's kind of the part we didn't care for, but how interesting that this planet likely did look like Adat, and now it is
Yeah.
just complete wasteland.
Yeah, I think it's cool at the beginning that we do pretty quickly get the revelation that these two planets and possibly the others seem to be somewhat, if not identical, very, very similar, right? Which leads you to believe that maybe these planets have been curated somehow, right? That they've developed them this way for a specific reason. But yeah, like, and I get the backdrop of the war, right? Like it makes sense to have these kids who have had a very cush life kind of see perspective of war for the first time and see a place of familiarity that's been very changed, right? Like I think that's kind of a cool thing. But ultimately it left me with so many questions about what's going on this planet. Like I really feel like the war situation was used as a plot element for the characters. And so it really wasn't, maybe it was thought out, but it wasn't explained, right? And so like I have a lot of questions, like what are they fighting over? Why are they at war? How long have they been at war? Like who are the good guys? Like because we don't even see these Attin group, they don't even fight anybody this whole episode. They, but which makes sense, confront Jod and they're like, who are you? But they obviously don't kill him. And so it doesn't even seem like we really have any indication as to, and I feel like that's what I was missing. Like I feel like if I knew a little bit about at least why they thought they were fighting, like, but we don't even get that. And there is an interesting scene where Neel kind of says something about having never fought or why are you fighting or something like that. And Hannah, the girl, just kind of gives him a look like she never thought about why she's fighting.
It's what we do, yeah.
And I thought that could be a really interesting thing, is to kind of explore, like maybe they don't know why they're fighting. Maybe this is a war they've inherited. And so this war situation, I don't mind it. It just left a lot of questions for me that I'm pretty sure we're not going to get answers for. Because I think the situation on this planet was to serve the character moments that we get, which are fantastic. But I'm a little bit bothered that we're not going to get any more explanation as to why these groups are the way they are, why there's kids on one side and not on the other side. There's just a lot of questions I have. And some of that I know is nitpicky, but I don't like being introduced to situations and knowing that I'm probably never going to know what's going on. So
my thoughts on
that was
like
my big issue.
Yeah. No, I get that. My thoughts on it weren't even like the why behind the fighting. I just assumed like the society has devolved to the point to where they just fight over anything, right? Like it's they stole our Yopis, and so now we're gonna go slaughter them. Like that's kind of what she mentioned. Like we're gonna go get our Yopis back and then destroy their crops, or something like that along those lines. So I was just under the impression that all they did was little territorial disputes constantly, because that's just what they have, right? Like the planet's got nothing else for them to do. So, and then they all think, oh, if we're just in charge of everything, then we'll have it made, but there's still nothing there. So I thought that was kind of where they were coming from on that line. The thing I didn't
makes sense.
care for too much, and Andrea Padawan Chronicles talked about it too, was like, if you're like going to fight these people and get your Yopis back, and you're putting like these 4 city kids up on the front lines, like obviously either it was just bait, or you hope they're just putting them out there as bait, because otherwise if they think they're going to be able to go out there and get anything done, then that's not going to happen, right? So that didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense too. But again, that is just super nitpicky.
Yeah, because
I
they
feel like.
they did. Yeah, I mean, they did seem to have like some weird, unexplained like this idea of like honor and like the children are
Yeah.
important and the children can
Yeah.
fight, and maybe that's just an excuse to get them to fight, right?
Mm.
Like I don't know. But again, I think there's a lot of really interesting potential. I feel like that was left on the
Yeah.
table. One of the things is Wim. Like I feel like this would have been a really great opportunity for Wim to see that maybe his desire for adventure and excitement isn't all that it's cracked up to be.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but throughout the episode, he's just like having fun, shooting a gun.
He's
Like this is
into it.
great. This
Yeah.
is amazing.
Yeah.
And so I feel like this war is supposed to provide like a perspective shift, but I
Mhm.
don't feel like it does.
Not for
Um,
him.
Definitely not for him. And then I feel like Fern has a bit of a moment, but I think that has
Yeah.
more to do with Hana than it does the war. We'll talk about that in a minute. But
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
For
I'm
sure.
also confused. This is another nitpick, but it's just little things that bother me. Again, everything I had that I didn't like with this episode is really just personal issues. But like the guy mentions that they only interact with off-worlders like with trade. Like he said, we
Mhm.
don't really deal with off-worlders much. So this planet has clearly been interacting with people from off-world. So this planet, is it a secret? And if it's not a secret, why would Kim have not had this planet on her star chart? Why would she have sent him to the wrong planet? Like that bothered me a little. So
Well, and also
I
they
don't know.
think all of those other planets are destroyed. No, that's a good
Yeah.
point. I don't even think that's nitpicky, right? Like the fact that well, I guess we assume that this planet is one of the jewels. It
Yeah.
appeared that when they got to that room, which we'll talk about later, but no, I think that could be like a
Yeah.
big plot hole that they just
It
completely
annoyed me a little.
glossed over there. Just maybe
Yeah.
like kind of
And
missed it.
it's a
That'd
line
be
of
a little.
dialogue, right? Like when that's not when you're filling in dialogue and having characters interact, sometimes you just write things in.
That's a
I
big
feel like
one
this
though.
may be something that got missed. Whether he's
Yeah,
talking
that's
about,
a
yeah, we
big
just
one.
really we just interact with worlders. I can't even say that word for trade, which
Huh.
means there's planets. There's got to be ships coming and going from this planet. So
No,
I
that's
don't know.
interesting. So, but the main thing here, as far as the dystopian nature of this
Yeah,
one place, I think the main point that they were wanting us to get at a minimum, the main point would be you had to look back at it and be like,
yeah,
oh my gosh, look at what it has devolved to, right? Like this
yeah.
probably was the same
Like
thing or
something's gone wrong
similar
on this
minded.
planet,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
likely the other planets as well. So
yeah. I think that's what we're gonna get now.
yeah,
Kind of moving ahead into what was probably like the main point of
yeah,
this episode, outside of continuing the whole Attin thing, Achrann, Jewel of the Republic, was the
yeah,
character development we had. So
yeah.
obviously,
Some
like I
real
feel
good
like
stuff.
80% of this episode, if not more, was devoted to Neel.
Yeah,
So we see him, and I don't even know if his is development more so. I mean, it is. He's brave, but it's a lot of like just him the way he is normally causing other people
yeah,
to grow, which I
yeah.
think is cool. Like
It's
he's that
super
character.
cool. I wrote down.
Yeah.
I wrote down the same note. Is that normally when you see your heroes or whoever come in contact with conflict or trial, like they're challenged to change, right, or do something
Mhm.
differently. But Neel doesn't, and he doesn't change. He's consistent. Like he has this
Yeah.
really strong identity of what he thinks is right and
Mhm.
important, and it really plays into more of other people kind of changing their
Yeah.
mindset. So I love that he isn't changed really by this. I would argue he doesn't really change at all throughout this.
Yeah.
Um, and so I love that he doesn't go that route of, oh, I'm not brave, I need to be brave, or oh, I'm
Yeah.
weak, I need to find a way to be strong, right? Like you kind of see at the end. We'll talk about that later, but I think the way they handled his character was really well done because I think it places
Yeah.
importance on some different things other than I'm a good leader or I'm strong or I can fight.
Yeah.
Um, so I thought that was incredible. That conversation where he's sitting on the wall is so good.
Yeah, no, when he just hops up there and goes
Yeah,
crisscross applesauce there,
that's
and he's
so great.
explaining, and then he's even like, he's just so comfortable in the fact that this is not what they
Yeah,
do. I mean, he's talking whatever about all that, and he goes, we have slap ball, as if
yeah,
that's like, like that's like this big thing. It's like Obi-Wan mentioning the Clone Wars in passing. He's
yeah,
like, well, we do have slap ball, and so
yeah,
he goes into that, and he's just completely non-aggressive in this aggressive
Yeah.
situation. And so I just loved his character. And then we
Yeah.
can skip ahead a little bit, but like he's not practicing with the weapons. He's not doing any of that. And then they have him leading. Like he's going out and he's talking himself up and he's in the middle of all of it. And like that's kind of his big moment. Like he was terrified, but he was still going. And then, they get saved and you get that picture of Jod hugging him, which was just perfect. Like that was such a good scene there. But then you even jump ahead a few minutes later and like SM-33 is ready to take all of them out. And Neel is the one who throws the rock at him, right? Like he's brave. And so that's kind of, you see Neel going full circle. Like he will step out a little bit and he will do the dangerous thing if it means protecting his friends. And so I think this whole episode was kind of a big thing for him. Like I don't think he's going to be a warrior or anything, but the fact that he is willing to kind of step out and do it, as to where before he was just being drug along into everything.
Yeah, I like that they don't shy away from the fact that Hannah views him as unable to fight. And Neel views himself that way, right? Like scared, he's like, I guess my clan is weak, right? Like he's like, I guess, and I think he's a really good foil for Fern in this episode, because Fern, who we have just collapse into this crisis of like not knowing who she is and not feeling like she can do the stuff, and then you have Neel over here who's just like unfazed. Like I love it when he's talking to this girl who's only known war her whole life, and he's just like, fighting is bad. Like that's what he says to her. He's like, fighting's bad. And he's like, I'd just go apologize. Like he says, like, I'd go say I'm sorry. He's like, but that's probably because I'm scared. So it's so cool just to see like that, this idea that he doesn't have to change, right? He doesn't have to become like the brave leader who's charging the front lines, or he doesn't have to be trained in combat. It doesn't preclude him from being brave and saving his friends at the end. And one line I thought was really interesting is when Hannah's talking to him at the end, and she says, your weakness. And you feel like it's going to be kind of cliche. She's going to be like, your weakness is your strength. But that's kind of what I thought she was going to say. But she says, it was too. Your weakness, it makes you kind. And so she's not saying you're not weak, right? She's like, you are weak, but it does something to you. And it kind of makes her rethink.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was so cool, because it's totally, I think Neel's aware of, there's this idea of these other things that people do, that people pursue, that, people care about power and importance and fame. And Neel's just like, I don't care. Right. And he's the better for it. And he's kinder for it. And, not to take this off on a completely derailed route, but like just it's like a very biblical thing, where it's like in not being about yourself and about being humble and meek and being okay with not being the star of the show. Like there's good things that are produced from that. And so I like that idea that they didn't say you're not weak, but they're like, your weakness makes you kind. I just thought that was such a great line.
Yeah, that was, because I did expect as well, like your weakness makes you strong. No,
something
it
like
makes
that.
You different.
Yeah. I love that.
I thought too, just kind of going through this, like watching Neel, and this is another like side tangent we're probably taking, but like if you look at all these kids, and you look at the ones that are thriving the most in this situation, I think you've got Neel and KB, right? Like KB's doing okay, and I think in those two situations, you've got the parents that are most invested in the kids. Like you see Neel's family is like a perfect little family, and they're all, very much a tight knit unit. And then you see Neel like sticking to his guns, and he's still, he's not facing this big crisis. Like he's still scared. He's fully aware that he's scared, but he's still doing it. And KB, there's not a lot of focus on her, but like I just feel like she's kind of got her crap together. And then you look at the other two, and it's like they're almost always fending for themselves, like parents working late, doing whatever, and then they're like finding themselves in trouble, and they're like, oh, I'm not sure that this is what I'm cut out for, type of thing. So that's probably just a lot of inference into fictional characters. But I do think, kind of looking at Fern's development in this, hers, like, she's very much wants to be in charge, like has wanted to the whole time. It's very clear. And then in this episode, you get to her, and like once she kind of realizes the weight of being in charge. Like they
Yeah.
end up in this big battle. She's like, "Oh, we're gonna go explore. I'm the captain." All this. She gets them in trouble. They almost die. Then like the droid's gonna get them. And so like she's kind of getting the weightiness of like, oh,
Yeah.
being in charge. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a kid. And Wim
Yeah.
is still like on this adventure, like, no, you're great. And then she's like, no, that's not how the real world works. Like telling me
Yeah.
I'm great doesn't get it. And so I think she's kind of understanding the weight of all this that's going on. So Wim's obviously his growth, I think, is going to be a season long ordeal, right? Kind of as the main character. But it was cool to see Fern finally maybe get a little bit of humanity to herself.
Yeah, we kind of get to the bottom of it because she makes that comment to Wim. She's like, "You can't command me. Like I'm not a droid. Like you can't just command me what to do." And so I think we see that like it's not so much that she needs to be the leader. It's just like that's her way out of being told what to do. Like she obviously has issues at home with like feeling like she has no freedom. Like a lot of rebellion there. And you can see. I feel like she's very different as soon as they meet Hana. And like she sees this girl who leadership just comes so effortlessly. Mm-hmm. And like she kind of starts to withdraw a little bit and be a little bit quieter. And it boils up into that moment in the what did they call it? The fallen sanctum or whatever they called it on their planet. Yeah. Which is, man, working with middle schoolers for a living. That's such a thing, right? They care so much. Yeah. When someone else comes along and does something so easy that they want to be good at, like, oh, it drives the fool out of them. Like they hate it. And so I could see that. Like, and so I love that moment where she's just like, I can't do this. Like, I'm not the leader. I can't be the leader. And she collapses. And so it's really these cool opposite bookends of like Neel, who's like, I don't really care what everybody else is doing. This is who I want to be. And it allows him to really be brave at the end, right? Like his commitment and loyalty to his friends. And on the other end, you have Fern, who has no clue who she's supposed to be. Yeah. And it boils into this moment where she's like, I can't do this. And so we're seeing two very different responses from two very different characters right now. And so I'm curious as to where Fern's story goes now. Is how does she take a back seat now and feel like I don't have to be the leader, or does she grow into a leader? I think it'll be interesting to see where they push her character from this moment now that she's kind of broken down.
Yeah, after talking about this, I think I do like this episode more because there's a lot of depth if you can like spit out the bones and chew on the meat. Like there's a lot of depth.
There's a lot,
and like, you see her walls had to come down for her character to grow, and Neel's just kind of had to dig in what he already was. I think that's really good writing in this episode. I think
the character stuff is so good, and that's why I'm kind of annoyed with how I feel about the episode because there's such great stuff in it. And so I hate that like the weird dystopian setting bothers me so much because otherwise I'd be giving this episode like a 9. So again, it's purely personal, just a personal aesthetic thing because there's really good stuff in this episode.
No, I agree on all that. And it's fun because last week we saw KB's character grow a lot, and then I think we kind of see the trend that we're going to see a lot more of these kids going forward. They had a setup. And now I think they're going to dig in until probably episode like 7-ish, and then really get into that finale mode. So that's pretty cool. So let's get in to the mystery of this whole thing. That's kind of the main event, if you will. Which I almost think the character development should have been the main event at this point, but the mystery, right? So in the previous episode, if I could say the title, I would, but I can't read very well. So the owl lady, Kim, she gives them these coordinates, right? Like so she thinks it's, or they think it's to Attin. You show up right at the beginning of this episode, and they're like, "Oh, Attin." They go through that nebula and everything, right? Like everything is identical. They get on the planet. Identical but destroyed. Neel knows immediately it's been messed up for a while because of the trees. I thought that was really interesting. Where he's like, no, this is
he was pretty observant.
Too big.
Yeah,
super observant. You go into that house and there's the mural in that house. I don't know if you noticed that, but the same mural, or almost the same mural at least, is there. The house looks just like Fern's living room, is what it looks like.
Yeah, same kind of design.
the street. So it's that cookie cutter neighborhood, right? That's what we call those neighborhoods.
Yeah, when they're flying in, that overview looks exactly the same of like the street and the houses. Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, like, what the heck is going on with all these planets, right? There's something like, there's a big picture deal. If they're all the exact same looking, and then just one by one, they all get picked off, except Attin somehow makes it. Like, it's the craziest thing trying to like wrap your mind around where this is going. I'm not sure where it's going, but it's super interesting.
It is,
because they're going to go to all these other planets. I mean, that's the natural next step, but like they're going to find the same thing at every one, I would think.
Yeah. And it's getting really interesting because Kim is obviously familiar with this legend of the jewels of the Republic, and she calls them planets of wonder, which makes you question, like, what is it that's so significantly, or was so significantly special about these places? Like, I mean, I feel like you don't get such a special name and get called the jewel of the Republic just because you're a planet where you stuck some people there, right? Like, which kind of seems like the case, is that they curated these planets. I was talking to you the other night. I was trying to translate that blasted star map, which
I'm recording on my phone, of it, I would pull it up.
Some of it doesn't translate well. But like, there's some interesting things on there. It says like the families were housed. That's one of the sentences on there. The word withered is used in there.
I was about to say, it gives
talking
you the
about the worlds,
the dystopia.
Yeah. And so it seems and sounds like these people were put here, but as for the why and what makes these planets so special, like, that's the big question for me. Is what in the world was so important about these places that they have gained this legendary status? So that I'm still super invested. Like, I'm still really curious about this.
Well, I'll tell you, I was not expecting, like, there's going to be some serious lore behind all of these worlds that is
seems
currently
like
non-existent. Like, there's just going to be so much to tell, and it's almost like you played the Pokemon games, right? Like, on the Game Boy growing up and stuff like that. And you know, like, Team Rocket, like, there's always this conspiracy type thing going on. You know, like, even I've got one of the newer ones within the last like 3 or 4 years on the Switch, and it's the same idea, right? There's this big mystery. Oh, some big event happened, and like now there's this legendary thing happening. It's kind of following that playbook. Like, a long time ago, something crazy happened, and now like a Pokemon trainer kid like has to go figure it out. Well, in this situation, like, all these kids are having to go figure it out, and so there's going to be like just this big, apparently galaxy wide, you know, conspiracy type deal going on, to where there's all these worlds that are just wiped out. No one even knows or cares about it. Apparently, according to Kim, they think they're all destroyed except one. Now, I suppose destroyed could mean a couple of things. Because they assume Mandalore is uninhabitable, but it's still there, type of thing.
That's true.
Maybe they thought it was just destroyed as in not habitable. But
no longer a jewel.
Right. So, you know, but my thought was they think the planets don't exist, period. Right. Like,
could
destroyed. And then Attin went missing. So, I mean, that's super interesting. The fact that they even exist in the first place.
Yeah.
And there's coordinates to them.
Right. The whole thing is just super interesting because you got like what seems to be some sort of conspiracy revolving around how they were created, right? Because you don't just get seemingly identical planets just that's not a supernatural thing that happens, right? It's pretty constructed, and so you got that somebody did this intentionally, it seems like, and then you have the people that are put there and why they were put there, and now the fact that one of them's a legend, the rest are destroyed. There seems to be some sort of treasure connected to it. Like, there's a whole lot that's behind this one mystery of this one planet now. It's just kind of exploded into this whole other thing from what it was in the very first episode.
And there's 4 episodes to explain it now.
Yeah. So I'm excited about the mystery. I think it's been fun. And I think the resolution of it will be fun.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, and then you have SM-33. You learn that he's the one that
Yeah,
actually destroyed the coordinates to Attin because his captain told him to. And then you're like,
yeah, that
oh
was
my
cool.
gosh. Well, his captain one is going to be important,
Yeah,
obviously. Like before, I think we all were like, oh, I wonder who the captain is, right? We've kind of thought
yeah,
about that, but we've never been like, oh, we've got to know who the captain is. I think we do need to know who the captain is
yeah.
at this point. So that's
Or
going
the
to be super
possibility that the
interesting.
captain's not even alive.
I
The
would
captain
assume
could be
not.
dead.
I mean, because on the ship, all of the
Yeah, I don't know if one of them's the
there's the
captain or
dead
not.
people with their
Yeah,
skeletons now. So I mean,
yeah.
that takes a while
Which
to get there.
I love the like his story is like such a it's a straight
Yeah,
callback to Treasure Island and Treasure Planet. Like, because in Treasure Island, the captain he buries the treasure and then kills everybody, like who is with him,
yeah,
Captain Flynn. And so we got
yeah.
kind of a
That
similar
was an Easter egg.
situation
Yeah,
where he wipes everybody out. And then in Treasure Planet, there was the robot who like had forgotten his memory, and couldn't remember anything until they found like the missing piece. And so there's some cool little Easter eggs to some classic pirate stories. But yeah, I'm glad they went ahead and resolved the SM-33 thing, um, because I think it was beginning to become pretty apparent to all of us that this line he kept repeating, that there was more to it, right? It wasn't just I really don't know anything about it. Like that was his specific line he said every time. We're like, okay, we need to figure out. So I'm glad they went ahead and did that and didn't draw that out.
it's definitely interesting. Like his can't say I know much. Like it's not like, oh, forgetful. It's like I literally cannot
Yeah,
say anything about it. And no,
yeah,
that's kind of the mystery going forward because we see, Jod flips his switch, right? Like he turns him
yeah,
off. So
yeah,
where will you pick up next? Well, what are they going to do with this droid? Who is his captain? Is he just going to be like a murderous droid trying to get him the whole time now? Like,
yeah,
is he going to be asleep till later on in the season? Like, there's a lot there. But the main thing, though, is like, I think they're going to have to start hopping on all these planets because there's going to be one of
yeah,
these
for
towers on
sure.
all the planets. And then that's where they're going, right? Like, they're eventually they're going to find something on one of
Yeah,
these that gets them back home. And I think that's the first time we've
yeah,
had like clear direction out of the show.
yeah. I mean, they're stuck there and all they have is coordinates to these other planets, and so I'd be shocked if that's not what we're doing next. Is just moving to another planet to try to find these coordinates. But the show's been surprising me, so who knows? I do think we've seen that shot of a desert planet, so that would make sense though, right? Like if maybe one of these planets, like whatever they were doing to kind of terraform the planet, failed, and so one of them is just like a desert wasteland or something. I could see that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think we're going desert planet next.
Yeah,
But I mean, as far as this at Achrann at Attin goes, I don't have too much left to say. Like it's just it kind of is what it is at this
yeah.
point. Did you have any other stuff?
How many of the planets you think we get to?
I think we may hit them all. I mean, unless they
Think
find that
so?
like some actually don't exist.
You would definitely have to hit up a few in a single episode, for that to happen. But
Yeah, I think they're gonna have to go to these planets. They're gonna learn what happened. That's kind of
yeah,
the big question at this point. What happened? I think we're gonna get at least an idea of what happened. I do think the main focus is gonna be what Attin is and them getting home to it. Um, and then maybe them getting away. I don't know. I think that's interesting. But because I mean, what if there's people that know what's going on? So
yeah,
unless Jod either dies or stays there, you've got someone who knows something that they don't need to know. So
yeah.
it's going to be interesting to see
Well,
how they take care of that aspect of the
yeah.
story.
Well,
But
that's
yeah, they will.
I was gonna say that's another thing is like we didn't even go back to Attin in this episode. Like that's a whole nother storyline that we didn't even visit. Is what are the parents doing? What's going on back there? Um, because they're not just gonna like sit around and do nothing. So at some point we got to go back to them, and at some point we got to have an episode that's about Jod. I think that who is Jod Nanawood, right? And like what is his deal? Where did he come from? Um, how good is he with the Force? I kind of wondered if he actually made a bargain with those guys or if he just handled them. I
Mind
don't
trick.
know.
Well, handled him or did a mind trick. Like how
Something.
far in
Because he
this
was
is
very
he?
vague, but
Yeah.
he's like, oh, I just bargained with him.
No, that's interesting too. I think either this the next two episodes, I think you probably get a lot of Jod,
Yeah.
and you probably get one that's focused a lot more on the parents.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. That would get us to 5, 6
Yeah.
into the kind of the 7, 8 closing mode of wrapping it all up. That would make a lot of sense. So yeah, maybe that is where this is.
And I do
this
hope
is
we
gonna
have a
head.
lot more of Jod in the next episode. They kind of split from him,
Yeah,
but I'm really starting to enjoy the interactions with the kids, like just the hug,
yeah,
and Fern's like, thank you, I'm sorry, and he just kind of has that. He's kind of uncomfortable with it, but at the same time,
yeah,
you can tell he's glad they're okay. And
yeah.
then when Wim's like, you stole my stuff, he's like, yeah. He's
I
just like, I
did.
did.
I
I
did
love
steal your
that.
dataries.
That
Yeah,
was funny.
that's funny. Yeah,
So
so
definitely want to get an episode with him at the forefront.
yeah, no, that's gonna happen for sure. So that's kind of where we're at. I'm so excited
Yeah.
for where this is going at this midway point. Like I am so excited. Star
Yeah.
Wars knows how to do an
It's a lot of
episode
fun.
5, right? Like if you
That's
look at the
true.
5th episode, you've got obviously
Ooh,
Empire Strikes Back. You've got
the
that's kind of
OG.
tongue in cheek, but you've got
Yeah.
Ahsoka, the Shadow Warrior.
Shadow
I mean,
Warrior.
so good.
Awesome. Yeah.
Acolyte. What was it called? Night.
Night.
Right where they're
Yep. It's
where
great. That was a lot of
the
fun.
stranger takes care of business. That
Yeah.
was good. So how cool would it be if this kind of turns into the episode 5? Like Taylor Swift has her track 4s. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's like her really sad songs on her episodes or on her albums. Like,
That's
and they're
funny.
always like so deep. Star Wars
Yeah.
has their episode 5s. So I'm
I hope
excited
so.
to see
Yeah.
where this goes. But yeah, kind of looking at the show now, this show, not the good show, Skeleton Group, this show, our podcast. Next week, we are going to have a look ahead at 2025. So we're going to kind of take a little bit of break from Skeleton Crew talk. We'll pick back up on it the following week, though. But we're going to talk Andor, 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith, Visions Volume 3. That's really the only confirmed things we have. It's the Force Awakens 10th anniversary, so we'll touch a little bit on that. But that's going to be kind of rounding out the year, looking ahead to the next one. So we appreciate you joining us to talk some Skeleton Crew. Let us know what you thought of episode 4, and we will catch you next week to talk about Star Wars in 2025. We'll see you guys later.